We are about to start the Capital Budget Committee meeting. Any guests, feel free to grab a chair and sit where you'd like. It is 7:04 p.m. on June 12th, 2024, and let's convene the meeting and we open it up. We have an agenda of items that was posted. What I think probably makes sense is to dispatch with the minutes first. That's a little bit out of order from our posted agenda, but unless anyone has any suggestions otherwise, I think we should begin with the minutes. Hearing no other proposals, nicely, Corey once again with her heavier stock paper has provided us a written copy of the proposed minutes from our last meeting, which was all the way back on Wednesday, April 3rd, 2024. I have looked this over and I only have one comment, but it is not specifically about the language in here. Does anyone have any comments about the language? No? Okay. So in general, I have been refreshing my understanding of the open meeting laws. And one of the parts of the open meeting are to take minutes and to make sure the minutes get posted, etc. One of the things that minutes, according to guidance from the state, is supposed to include are references to any written materials that the committee had considered during the course of its meeting. And we don't have to attach them, but we should reference them when we're actually looking at something in the meeting minutes.
Okay.
I am trying to recall whether or not there was anything specific in writing that we looked at with respect to these stormwater MS4 permit compliance, the Historical History Center, or the police vehicle. My recollection is, if anything, we were looking at sort of the proposed warrant at the time because the numbers had moved, and I believe that advisory had taken a vote on different numbers.
That's my memory too.
Okay.
We were really only voting on new numbers. We'd already discussed the issues.
Right. So I don't think we were going back to any sort of underlying documents that came along with the proposals for these. So what I would recommend we do is, to the extent that we can come to a consensus on what documents, if any, we looked at in consideration of these, that we note them at some point in the minutes. And I guess, first of all, does anyone remember actually looking at anything?
Well, I would say that what we were given by Jeremy in the beginning, which had a copy of all of the forms that had been filled out and written bids that had been acquired, he attached all that together. And I think really that was as comprehensive as anything we ever saw.
But with just this meeting.
Oh, with this meeting?
Yeah, just this meeting.
We didn't see anything.
There was something new, even the History Center was the same.
Well, the numbers had, so we had voted on these matters previously based upon different numbers.
Yeah.
The numbers changed, and I'm just trying to recall whether or not it was in reference to specific like draft warrant, or if it was just verbally, we knew that the numbers had changed, so we just voted based upon our knowledge based upon conversations.
I think it was verbal.
It
Okay.
was the latter of what you just said.
Okay, so verbal. Okay. All right. Well, in that case, if we did not actually look at any specific documents, do I hear a motion?
I have a motion to accept the minutes as they are here.
I second that motion. All in favor?
Aye.
And aye for the third unanimous vote. Okay. And so I guess just going forward, one of the things we should remember doing, whoever is taking minutes for the meeting, is to jot down any documents that we're referring to incorporate them into the minutes.
Would they be attached in, like, the document would be then attached to the minutes essentially? Or how do
So
you then note that?
It's possible we could But what the guidance that I saw was that the documents don't need to be attached to meeting minutes. They could just be kept as sort of records of the committee. But they don't need to be attached to them.
Do you have a Google Drive, for example, of all the documents?
So the documents that I actually don't have like a Google Drive of documents. I know that we can talk with the IT for the town and see if there's access to a shared drive. No, we have an email address that we had gotten once upon a time. I don't think that there's a specific capital budget committee file folder somewhere, and I'm looking at any town employees to, if you're aware of anything like that.
I am not, I am not. I know we have like a F drive, a hard drive that we have different things on it, but only certain people can access it. I don't think there's any big general capital budget.
With respect to the documents that I have received over time that I have then utilized or referenced during the course of a meeting, I have kept those. And so, I mean, I could sort of reproduce that. However, in terms of a shared drive, I don't have them saved anywhere in particular, but we could look into getting them.
Yeah, I think at the beginning of our meetings, when we met with budget makers, that Jeremy sent us a very comprehensive file, and I downloaded my copies, and I bet you I still have it. And that was everything. Yeah, he sent us bids, summaries of the proposals, everything. So that's kind of like a little
Right.
packet of everything we need to have. So
Yeah, I'm sure that he has that on his hard drive as well.
Yeah, so that is, resides as part of the capital plan, which I believe
Okay,
is
so
saved
they're
for
not
the
just-
town.
Yeah.
But, okay. Now, moving on to, why don't we talk about the planning for the fiscal year 2026 capital budget process? I know historically what we have done is we have sent out a letter on or about Labor Day to various town departments soliciting proposals for capital budget items that the committee would review. I think it probably makes sense to maintain similar timeframes based upon what worked this past year. Just to catch everybody up who might be wondering how our process worked, we sent out a letter and Jeremy spearheaded on behalf of the town an effort actually to sort of collect all of those and provide a little bit more vetting and incorporate them within a more comprehensive capital plan. And then provided them ultimately to the capital budget committee, and I think as advisory as well. So the timeline that we worked off of last year, I think was pretty effective. We definitely had some sort of stragglers that came in late with items, and inevitably numbers will change just as we sort of voted and noted earlier. But I still think trying to get out that solicitation on or about Labor Day would make sense. Does anyone think that that timeframe was too late or too early in getting a letter out to the sort of quote budget makers?
Well, we sent the letter twice last year. We sent it once the day after Labor Day, and then we sent it the second time, the 1st of November.
A little nudge, nudge.
Yes, the reminder. And I'm looking at what Jeremy sent out, which aside from the dates of the scheduled meetings, pretty much covered everything else. And he dated his thing October 29th, but they had to submit their budget requests by November the 17th. He evidently has more club than we do.
No, I think that he getting things early and being able to vet them
Is
and
good.
put them in a comprehensive capital plan makes a lot of sense.
Exactly.
And I think that they're at that point, starting to think about allocation and what sources of money to use also, which again helps us out dramatically. So in terms of meeting schedule, I know last year we sort of kicked off and said our first meeting was going to be on or about December 5th. And we had that with the fire department and the police department, who historically have been well organized for their proposals and have things that they can acquire off of the state list, or they have bids and numbers, which is great. So I think it probably would make sense to start again with the fire and police department. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
I agree with you. And if we're still gonna meet on Tuesday, the first Tuesday in December is December 3rd.
The Tuesdays make the most sense for members of the committee?
They're good for me.
When they work for me, we were on Wednesdays for the most part with the advisory, right?
And I think we were gonna do 7 o'clock.
I think that works better
Yeah.
for people not to have to stay too late.
Yeah.
So December the 3rd would give us at least a couple of weeks to sort of digest any of the proposals for fire department and police department, which I think is sufficient time, especially if they've been sort of well vetted. And then sort of running off, if they try to get as much done before Christmas as possible, I think perhaps December 10th, which is another Tuesday.
That's-
And with that, we could do DPW and town buildings as well. Oftentimes the schools, there's a little bit more in flux. They oftentimes have very, pretty good bids, but sometimes they're still working with consultants in terms of figuring out what the final details of their proposals would be. So I think having them third in our queue would make sense. And then the all others, so that would be like rec or housing, some other departments, IT, for example, could fall into the all others, or should we put one of those in a different bucket?
Maybe we could flip that because, and this has happened before, and I was reminded of it when it happened this year. The school budgets, their requests are very driven by, they need a vote of their committee. And the school committees, do they meet twice a month or once a month? Twice. They've never been prepared when we asked them to be. So maybe we ought to,
But then last,
yeah,
that's fair. So the all others, which seems kind of odd to put that before you've exhausted everything else, could go. So I think that, do you think it would be the 17th, or is that too close to the holiday? We should
It's
roll
a
it
full
to
week
January.
away from Christmas Eve, so. It's fine.
Okay, I don't know what other dates of holidays falling at that time of year, but 17th should work for me. I know the school, last day of the school is the 20th. Getting the Monday off, bonus this time, this year.
yeah, and Hanukkah doesn't start till the 26th.
So the 17th then?
Okay.
That's a fairly aggressive schedule. Hopefully it holds. And then do we wait until the 14th then, in January? For the last meeting?
Okay,
That way, hopefully we can catch up to anything that needs to be revised as well.
okay. Does that work with advisory? We're done by the end of January?
I would just encourage everybody to speak up because.
Okay.
Up there, if it's gonna get recorded.
Right. Hopefully you guys can hear us.
Actually, really well. This is the best I've ever heard a hybrid meeting sound.
Oh.
Oh, great.
Well, that's great.
Okay, I think we need to decide whether what kind of a letter we're going to send and when we're going to do it. And I kind of think it would be a good idea if we're not going to send a Labor Day letter, that we ask Jeremy if he could send his letter out earlier.
So I would think it best for us to send our own letter,
Okay.
expecting, no offense to Jeremy, but if he gets, waylaid somehow, doesn't send anything out, then we at least have our letter that is very clear saying, this is what we would like, these are our deadlines, these are the proposed meeting dates. I know that this past year, there were some entities or proponents that didn't quite understand the schedule of the meetings. So I think it would be just helpful to have something. So that's my thought, but open to,
Can I just go back to the dates? Perhaps we have something on the 7th then, and then maybe have the 14th. I just get nervous if the school is on the 14th, that maybe they are not ready. So maybe encourage it to be on the 7th. And then,
oh, I'm not sure if putting a date earlier is going to assist. If in part they're waiting to have a school committee meeting, it's not gonna happen probably on. the
Okay,
short
all right, I
meeting
just wanted to-
January 1st.
thank you. Otherwise, I'd say still get the letter out right after Labor Day. Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
I'll recognize,
I was just gonna say that you probably could check in with the schools and probably get an idea of what their schedule is on, would probably have a rough idea of when she thinks that she'd be bringing stuff to them. She might not know exact dates and stuff would change, but you probably could get some info that might be helpful.
yeah, no, that's fair. We could definitely speak with Don about that. I was just thinking that because of the holidays, the 7th is the sort of first Tuesday after the 1st, and unless they voted back in mid-December, they probably wouldn't have had.
Yeah.
a meeting at that point.
I don't think they would have done it that way. Yeah. So I'm just looking at what we would, do you have the letter? Did you manage to find it?
No, but that's okay.
They're going to submit their information on the form that Jeremy gives them. So this comes out.
Well, again, I don't think we should ever assume that Jeremy's gonna send out a letter. We should just send it out. If we get something packaged nicely like Jeremy gave it to us last year, we should be happy.
Okay.
But I guess I'm just not making the presumption. It's best if we ask for everything we want, with the understanding that if we get a package like Jeremy had with the form,
Mhm.
that's sufficient.
Okay,
If you think that we need to add a line saying that,
I think we need to reference the fact that they're going to be submitting their material via Jeremy when it happens and not directly to us. Because that's what happened last year.
right. And again, that assumes that is going to happen, and Jeremy, doesn't get let go next week, right? I mean, I would rather have a request that says, we want this stuff and
Okay.
give it to us. But, we can include a line, and I agree with you.
Okay,
This can be satisfied by providing the requested information that the town administrator had requested on forms consistent with fiscal year 2025.
sounds very official. I'll write that down.
I just don't want to leave things to chance, so
Yeah.
to speak. And you could become the town administrator for some larger town next week. You might find a new opportunity. I mean,
You could check in with him and see what his plans are.
yeah, no, we have spoken with him, yeah,
Especially the plans for the letter, not his plans for, managing.
for his career.
Okay,
No, I mean, I believe his plan is to do something very similar with some minor tweaks as it happened last year, but.
and the other thing that was sort of niggling away in the back of my mind is I don't think we need to explain the fact that we don't need to explain the fact that we have changed to a $25,000 floor But I think we do need to say something, because last year we did get, that was up here.
Right.
Last year we did get requests for less than 25. We kind of got hung up about how to handle those. So are we going to continue? Was that a stopgap measure, or are we going to continue with that less than article?
Yeah, I mean, the recollection I had, and I know we have to jump into another topic, but was that the notion of, it was more of a transitory period where there would be a separate warrant article for capital like items that were below the threshold,
And non-recurring.
non-recurring, and so I think it's not gonna last forever, but it could at least last maybe next year, depending on how the various departments adjust to the new amount.
Do you think, Dan, here's a question for advisory. One of the things that drove the decision to have that less than non-recurring article was the idea that those were things that really didn't belong in the operating budget because they were non-recurring. I think there had been a time when we assumed that those things would eventually be absorbed into operating. Do you think that's still the case, or do you think that's never going to be the case?
So I'm not sure. And probably some conversations that need to happen to figure out the best way to handle that. My guess is that some of them will continue to be one-off things that shouldn't be in the operating budget. And they're probably of the list, there are probably some that should get absorbed into the operating budget. And some, I'm thinking, for instance, the 10,000 for open space for, printing and copy editing and managing their client. Where's that going to go in the operating budget? It could get tucked in, but really it doesn't fit anywhere. So there are probably going to be some items like that probably make sense to have that category for. And there may be other things that should just go in the equipment supplies line in the department's budgets. But I think that's still exactly, I don't have a clear picture in my mind of exactly how that would be.
In transition.
So I'm being very cognizant of the clock because I know at 7:30, we're gonna advisory then have a combined meeting. So I want to at least deal with one separate agenda item prior to doing so. And that's the discussion of numbers. And I apologize, Nora, I really wanted in the first instance ask what exactly it was that you wanted the meeting to be about, because I know you had originally proposed the meeting. I assume this is one of the items.
It was one of the two items.
And then the regional school
Right.
capital plan was the other.
That was it. I just want to go back to the possible, 5 members. I think that it makes for good standard operating procedure. A lot of committees are, and Jeremy had brought it up along with Heidi last year. I think around this time, I'm not sure. And I think I just wanted to kind of keep that discussion going because I don't even know how you had mentioned alternate members, but I feel like that just doesn't really make sense. What my thought was, I could definitely have a lot of people that would get involved. I think more eyes on capital budget items. I think a great example was Mike, when we were looking at the history center, and I wouldn't say library, the history center proposal, we're looking, is that included for certain things? I think more eyes that are on things and more people that are aware of, how capital budget works. I think it's a great opportunity for people to get involved in the town. And I know people that would like to be involved. And I think it would really, essentially it would be, to me, something easy would be the alternate member, 2 advisory people, because there are already 2 advisory people, and then just essentially get one other person. I think that would make more sense than just trying to find, do you want to be part of this, but you're an alternate. So I think that, to me, I just want to keep revisiting that. I don't know what the pushback is.
Have you tested anyone about?
Yes, I have 5 different people that I've tested.
What are they willing to do?
They're willing to come to the meetings. They know it's basically in the fall, for 6 meetings essentially to come to. Obviously, it's more for advisory, but you already have 2 advisory people that are committed to come. I don't know who be Mike next year.
Um, So, I just want to update the committee briefly. So I had a conversation with the former moderator. And she was no longer going to be the moderator going forward, so, I need to have a conversation, with the, I guess, current moderator to discuss what we had last, I think either approved or discussed was to have sort of the associate or affiliated members, I forget the term.
Associated.
Yeah, who would come in and be part of the committee, sort of as either as a transition to come on as full committee members, or for them to actually just see whether or not they actually liked it, wanted to do it. And I thought that would be a pretty good plan to sort of bridge this. And what I can do in the meantime is, again, just try to line that up with the current moderator, make sure that there's no legal hurdles, but just make sure all that's
Yeah, I don't know
ironed
if it
out.
has to come to the select
And
board approval or how the moderator just does that and they appoint it.
so I think with the associate, I know it's now 7:30, so why don't I do this? Why don't I run all of that down to make sure I know exactly what sort of legal parameters they are? If you provided me with the names, I will then reach out to the people to see if they're interested
Okay.
in that position.
Mhm.
Assuming there are no legal hurdles, that we can implement that, I think as early as this fall, again, assuming no legal hurdles.
All right,
The other thing we had talked about, and Jeremy had suggested that we have a flex number of members. Evidently personnel has that. And it, in the bylaw, it would be like 3 to 5 members. And, depending upon how we can fill it.
Right. If it's full, then it could be a full 5. If not, then maybe just down to 3. And so,
okay.
Okay. I apologize if we can talk more about that later.
No, that's fine. I'll get you the names.
Okay, great. At this point, then, I guess, in terms of links, do we have a separate link we need to dive into?
Same way.
Okay,
So we should, I don't know how we want to organize ourselves physically, what board chairs should be. Okay, so I'm Dan Sickle. I'm gonna, as chair of advisory, I'm gonna open the advisory meeting for what is it? June 12th, Thursday, June 12th. Just trying to get all my Wednesday, June 12th. Thank you. See, that's why I need you here. 2024. So that's our meeting for tonight. Calling that to order. And just for our agenda, let me just read through that and then we'll do a quick roll call on the agenda. We'll do some liaison reports. Current meeting item is to discuss, is to discuss some regional school committee and related issues. And then I think we want to talk just a little bit about dates of our subsequent meetings over the summer. So that's the plan. Motion to accept the agenda as read or any changes. So second. And roll call. Okay, we'll do people online and not. Actually, I guess we'll do a roll call. We're sort of in person, so we don't have to, but Wasim's online. So Nora.
Here.
Shelley.
Hi.
Paul.
Aye.
Pen.
Aye.
Mike Flanagan.
Aye.
Mike Winters.
Sorry, we'll call for what?
Approving the agenda as read.
Yeah, approved, yes.
Thanks. And Wasim, if you're there, you want to give a thumbs up or?
Yeah, aye.
Great. Okay. And I am I as well. So that gets us. Who are we missing? We're missing Nellie. Okay, 8-0, perfect. Okay, given that we're doing this hybrid thing, suggestion was made that we do quick introductions, just so everybody knows who's who and who's here. I'm Dan Sickle. If you just want to start over here, Mike, let's just spin around the room.
Vice Chair Mike Winters. Pen Young Advisory.
Peter Morris, Chair of the Capital Budget Committee.
Corey Lincoln.
Nora Lynch Smith, Capital Budget and Advisory.
Mike Flanagan, advisory and alternate capital budget member.
Shelley Summer Advisory.
Paul Pilot Advisory.
And Wasim,
Yep, Wasim Advisory.
yeah, also on advisory. Okay, I think everybody knows everybody, but just to, it's probably a little hard to see who's in the room and who's not. And an apology for people watching on hybrid. First time we're doing an advisory meeting hybrid and doing the best we can, but it's probably not the perfect setup all around. Okay, so any liaison reports, anything anybody has to share before we get to talking about regional school committee issues?
I just have one thing. So I haven't spoken to anybody officially about this as a liaison, but I've been liaison to Council on Aging, and Sue Keller is retiring. Has had so this, but that's not a secret. I don't think it is.
Thanks. Anybody have anything else?
Sure.
Okay. So then let's get going. So on school committee things, I have some things to report from different meetings and that I've been involved in and people I've talked to. Thought I would start just with kind of a readout of new information that I don't think everybody will have heard yet. Then there's one kind of somewhat involved legal issue about the regs governing use of excess and deficiency. And I think Peter's going to talk a little bit about that. And I thought we could get any comments on the draft letter. On the draft letter, I just note that I think the school committee isn't very active over the summer. So I think, in a sense, we have some time in that if we send it now, they're not going to really do anything with it for a while. So I think we have a little bit of time to work out some of the details. In terms of things I have to share, so one, I did connect with people on Dover Warrant and Dover Capital Budget. I'm going to meet with them next week, and we'll kind of share with them where we end up at the end of this meeting tonight. My guess is this is just a guess, not going to be as much of an issue for them as it is for us. It'll just be lower on their list of concerns, but we'll see where they are, make sure they know everything that we know. And if they're interested in joining in the letter, I would certainly be in favor of that, but we'll have to see what their inclination is and where we decide to go with the letter. I also met on Monday with Dawn Fattore for a couple of hours and talked through our concerns and many of the issues. So I thought I would just give kind of a thumbnail sketch of some of the things that came from that meeting. So started out by just kind of sharing our concerns and what were some of the things that we had been talking about. So in terms of some of the points that were raised in that draft letter, which I did not share with her, although it's a public document circulating, so she certainly could find it if she wanted to, as could anyone else on the school committee. On the point about all capital projects being on the capital plan until they're completed, whatever the financing is. So if they're financed with E&D, they don't disappear from the capital plan. She readily agreed to that. But yeah, of course, we can do that. We can keep what they would refer to as open capital projects, meaning they're underway on the plan and indicate, whatever the financing is, whether it's E&D or IMA or whatever. She also, specifically on the RTU project, did say that, in March, they knew what the final numbers were going to be. Their explanation was that the way Dawn put it is that they thought it was too late for the towns to really respond, do anything, to come up with an alternate financing. So they thought they would, finance them and take care of that on their own rather than bring it to the town. So that was her response on that point. But I think she understood the point made about, we would have preferred to have known as soon as possible because it would have created more options for Sherborn to perhaps make some different decisions about how to finance it. Might have ended up in the same place, but would have created some additional options. On the capital account, from which $350,000 came. So that is the account, I didn't know this, but that is the account where when there's a capital project that's approved, when the financing for that project comes through, those funds get put into the capital account, and that is the holding place for them. So they're segregated from the rest of the school budget. And then it's from that capital account that bills get paid as the project progresses. So on the boiler project, which was approved to be funded by E&D, $350,000 going to the capital account, Dawn said that if there was nothing else going on, that they would have taken that money out of the capital account, presumably back to E&D. But their view was that because there are upcoming capital projects, and in particular that they knew there were going to be some cost overruns on the rooftop units, they just let the money sit there with the anticipation that that's what they were going to do with it. We didn't know any of that. So I think when that came up, that they found $350,000 in that account, that was certainly a surprise to me, and I think to many others. But that was how they explained, what the account is and why things happen. And Dawn agreed, when we had said that we would like to know more about that account, would like to see tracking of money going in and out of that account, readily agreed to provide that as part of the budget process. On the specifics of what happened with the rooftop unit project and why it went 800,000 roughly over cost, she provided 4 pieces of information for that. One was that the initial estimate was just too low and not where it should have been. Another point too was that when the decision was made to shift from the original plan, which is going to have a natural gas component, to all electric units, that didn't change the cost of the equipment, but it did boost some related infrastructure costs because it had a different set of hookups. So it wasn't just take the old one out and screw the new bits onto the new equipment. It required some redoing of infrastructure because it had different hookups. It also evidently turned out that shifting to all electric was a big enough change that it necessitated upgrading everything around it to current code. Whereas if it literally had been take out the old unit and put in an identical new unit, then don't have to do everything up to code. But like a housing renovation, if you're doing a big enough renovation, then you have to bring everything up to code. Switching to all electric necessitated upgrading everything to code, and that added some extra expenses. And then the fourth point that she made was the 2-year delay in the timing of the project relative to when the first initial bid was done, escalated costs pretty significantly. So that was a little bit of the background I got from her for their explanation and sort of response to some of the issues that we raised. The other remaining really big issue is what are the rules, what are the regs governing excess and deficiency, and kind of the governance issue of the degree to which the regional school committee or the town should have say-so over how projects are funded and whether projects to be financed with E&D need to go through town meeting or not. And so Peter, I thought you might want to say a little bit about that, and then we can kind of throw everything open to talk about it.
Sure. So now, just as a caveat here, I don't believe this has fully been.
It is not. This is
Yeah.
it's still very uncertain.
Right, so this has not been discussed through town council or some sort of legal expert on this. This is me reading the regs. And so, first of all, there's, so in Massachusetts, the regs are oftentimes referred to as the CMR. So if I'm saying something about a CMR, I'm talking about the regulations in Massachusetts. And there's a regulation that's about regional school districts and how they should be governed, at least with the sort of budgetary. And that's 603 CMR 41.00. For anybody who's following along at home, that's the number. And so there are subsections, and there's one that's 41.05, which is regional school district budgets. And basically what it says in the sort of beginning part is that the regional school committee shall propose and take a vote on a budget. And the budget should contain all operating expenditures, all capital expenditures, and debt service payments to be paid from general revenues of the regional school district. And that this budget is ultimately then passed along, if it gets approved by the committee, to the local appropriating authorities. And that would be the town, for ours, the town of Dover and the town of Sherborn, to then take a vote on it. So this budget, again, should have all operating expenditures, capital expenditures, and debt service payments. And my read of these regulations is that when the school committee is using excess and deficiency for anything, operating or for capital expenditures, then it should be in the budget that again, then is passed along to the towns for approval. The excess and deficiency is in another section, which is right after this budget one, which is 41.06. And in that, it basically says that if the school district hasn't exceeded 5% for its E&D, then it has the discretion of whether or not to use the E&D for their expenditures. So for their budget, which would mean capital or operating. They have that discretion if they haven't hit that 5% threshold. If it's above that, then they have to use E&D to get it below that 5%. So in a situation like this, where they have amended their budget essentially for fiscal year 2025 by saying we're going to use E&D for something else that wasn't in their original budget, if it increases the amount of total budget or total expenditures, or if it's going to impact the town's assessments, then that can go to the town for basically approval or rejection. And my read of the regulations is that in this circumstance, there would be that 45-day window for the town to sort of reject an amendment to their budget. Because from what I can gather, their use of ED increased the total amount of the budget, increased their expenditures for fiscal year 2025. Now, what does that mean for sort of best practices, at least with the capital budget committee going forward? I would think, in the school district, is that historically the capital budget committee, I don't believe, and I know Corey's institutional knowledge is better than mine, is that typically when the school was using E&D, then the capital budget committee didn't fully vet those and didn't make a recommendation to the town of whether or not that was an appropriate expenditure. So I'm looking at my fellow members, and that means going forward, I believe that we should be fully vetting any capital expenditures, even if it was by using E&D, making a recommendation to the town of whether or not to approve that E&D usage or not. And so that would be something that we would expect the school district to provide us that information when they're going to use E&D so that we can then vet it. And in an ideal world, all of this happens, in my opinion, in our sort of normal cycle, right? So that we can kind of vet these things and then it goes to the town meeting. And they would be, the district's capital expenditures are listed out, and the ones with E&D and the revenue source are listed out. So if it was a borrowing, that's when capital budget would normally get involved, would historically had always been involved. But even when it's just a use of E&D, that we would get involved and we'd make a recommendation to the town, and the town in the warrants, which it didn't have, I don't think historically, has a line item in the school budget where it says capital expenditures. So that's my read of these regulations. And I think that's probably the best way to proceed forward and just making sure everybody has the same, general working framework and process in place, and the district, either believes that, hopefully, and agrees, and we'll do that sort of going forward.
Thanks, Peter. So, I think this is, this interpretation of the rules for E and D has been a bit variable and moving around. My interpretation, current interpretation matches Peter's. Think we have some work to do to get everybody on board with that, and then have some conversations with the school folks to see if, we can come to a common understanding of how this will work going forward. I do think that Dawn expressed when we spoke, I think, some flexibility about how this goes as compared to putting down a marker and saying we're going to do our own thing and, we don't care what you guys think. So I think there's some scope for finding a path forward that will adjust the procedures in a way that will shift the kind of governance balance from school committee does E&D independently to having a greater degree of oversight from the town in the way that Peter described. Okay, well, with all of Peter and me going through all that background, I would say let's throw it open. Comments about the issue, comments about things that should be in this letter that aren't, things that are in this letter that shouldn't be, other things we should be communicating to school committee, any other related comments, reactions.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Is it your recommendation or your thought that not only would the school committee submit a project that was being funded totally by E&D, that they would submit that for vetting, but that would also appear in the warrant and be voted on at town meeting?
So my general read of the regs is that their budget, which includes operating expenditures and capital expenditures, all needs to be approved by the town at the town meeting. So I don't necessarily, if there was a borrowing, I think historically that has been in the capital budget warrant and broken out. In theory, if it's just the use of E&D, then it would be a sort of a line item within their total budget, because it didn't require like a 2/3 vote for borrowing or something. So yes, it would be in there. And if somebody in the town, rose their hand at town meeting and said, I want a discussion about this line item in the budget, then it'd be up and budget could be rejected. In theory.
Okay, I sound like Sam Alito. But what would happen if it was a project that they intended to do totally out of E&D? We either said yay or nay, it went to town meeting and it got voted down.
So I'm not 100% sure on how the budget works for the school, whether or not we have the town has the ability to line item reject things, or if it has to be the whole budget that gets rejected. My understanding, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think the regs are a little ambiguous on how that works. It says that, as Peter said, that either operating or capital items are in the budget, and that the budget needs to be approved by the town. And if, E&D is a financing source, that's still in the budget. There isn't any specification of, so how would a town manage that in terms of what's in the warrant, what's voted on at town meeting? There's a whole set of regs about what happens if the school budget is not approved. But exactly, and this is exactly the point Peter was coming to. Well, what would it mean if there was this one project that people said, no, we don't want to support that? Would that mean the whole budget wasn't approved? And then, and so I think my read is the regs are a bit ambiguous. Town council probably can help us with that some. And what seems important is to come to an understanding with the school committee and with the select board and all of us about this is how it's going to go going forward, and everybody gets comfortable with that. Because you're raising one of the really practical questions, well, how exactly would this work? I think the regs really tell us that.
Because if it's an all or nothing situation, that could pose problems. But if it was, the town needs to approve the budget, and if it just had multiple warrants or broken it out, I mean, again, these are, there's some play in the joints probably.
Okay.
Any further thoughts, Corinne?
No.
Since you said San Luis or anything with the flag that's right, conveniently right behind you?
And I'm embarrassed to be aligned with them.
I also want to acknowledge Sean, on there, but, what in the past historically have been the maximum amounts that E and D, is this the like, over the top amount? Like, I always thought at our last meeting, the school committee, that it was more, quote unquote, little things, not big capital budget type of items. So what in the past has been E and D used for? Has it ever been for big budget items like this?
I
So
believe,
it has been used for capital budget.
But the max, I mean,
Well, I do recall that there was one occasion in my memory within the last maybe 10 years or something, that it exceeded 5% of the operating budget and they had to spend it down.
Meaning they applied it to the operating budget.
Yeah.
but I believe in the meeting that this was voted on by school committee, there was mention that this was the largest reappropriation of E and D in a single instance.
Mhm.
I believe, if I recall, that Don, I believe, was said in that meeting that this was certainly outsized, this $1 million reappropriation.
does that mean that going back to the original question, is that they're holding too much money? Should it be less money? Is that what we were talking about at that meeting too?
Yeah, and the last bullet point in the letter raised the point about, we think they should target a lower level on exactly that point. And in my memory, which doesn't go back all that far, the 500,000 that came from E and D and the 350,000 that came from the capital account, way bigger than anything that I've seen before, but my history doesn't go back all that far. Because it has typically, as you said, Nora, been small things, 60,000, 110,000, something like that. Maybe not small, but smaller.
And then the next question that begs like, why all this, why the change from natural gas other than the green part of it? Like who said that it has to be changed then to all electric? That's
So my understanding is that they heard from people in Dover and I should be careful about this because I don't actually know this, but they heard from people in Dover. I think they heard, I have been told, I want to be careful how I say this, I've been told that they heard from people in Sherborn as well, that, hey, this should be done in the most sustainable way, it should be all electric. And the school committee heard that and said, okay, fine, we'll do all electric. So there wasn't a process where this came back to capital budget and to advisory with, hey, we're thinking of changing the scope of the project. What do you think of this?
So that begs the next question. That was my question. Why didn't that get resubmitted then?
So I think there was discussion at a capital budget meeting about rooftop handlers and trying to
No,
figure
I
out a
do-
more sustainable way and moving off of the fossil fuels.
But we didn't know it was gonna be over 800,000.
No, I agree with you,
Difference.
but, and I don't know what the breakdown is, how much more is attributable to the power source, but there was at least discussion that they were doing that, and there's a number of other projects that they have chosen sustainable, and they had like even student subcommittees and stuff like that were trying to make the school system, the school buildings more sustainable. And remember that with the bathroom project.
So
So
it's just concerning because I'm just curious of how that's gonna impact the electricity bill. Is it gonna cause them to actually have more?
the electricity bill will go up based upon my recollection of the discussions we've had with the schools about sustainability projects. But the gas, obviously,
It's come to
Just
go
that.
away. Right, yeah, I know. I'm just thinking that. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Sean, you have your hand up if you want to unmute and jump. That's all right, sorry. Go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, I was waiting, but can you hear me?
And speak up. For whatever reason, the speaker is low in here.
Okay, is that better? You should be able to turn the volume up on your console.
Totally recognize it.
Can you hear me?
See, let me see if I can get the,
I can hear you.
try now.
Yeah, they need to hit the volume on the console. Is that better?
I got it. Thanks.
All right, I got to go back 2 comments. Well, one comment, there was never a vote in town to move to electric. That was the Energy and Sustainability Committee that suggested it. So I don't think there was ever a cost benefit analysis of whether or not that's even going to be a net benefit for carbon footprint. But more importantly, I just want to point out, I haven't read the letter. I may never read the letter. But I do want to caution you to kind of see through the forest for the trees. This should be less about whether or not the regulations allow what they did. But I'll remind everyone, a guy showed up at town meeting this year named Doug Kingsley, that if he knew there was an $800,000 flop on a capital project at the region, he 100% would have held that regional school committee budget. And rightfully so, because they should have come back to the town. That should have been vetted. Everybody knows that. That's why you're writing a letter to state that. That should have gone back through the capital budget committee process, just like everything I do, everything the 2 chiefs do. It should have gone back through. We could have discussed whether electric was a good idea to add that infrastructure for units that are probably only going to last 10 years. We don't know. But we didn't get that option, and we didn't get the option to borrow that money. And everyone knows that probably was wrong. And we probably, without a doubt, would have voted down the Pine Hill air handlers had we known. So it's not about whether or not they were allowed to do it. It's whether or not they should have done it. And I would also point out that putting this, whether or not it's going to be an E&D expense, as you guys have talked about, having it in the plan and vetting it will always have the effect of them being really careful. It would scare the daylights out of me to know my entire operating budget could get held at town meeting because I wanted to buy some capital with my budget. Right? I don't know that I'd ever choose to do that. I'd much rather go through the capital project and have a standalone item on the ballot rather than finagle some E&D that I should have not had, because it could have thrown the whole budget, and it would have. There definitely would have been a hold on the regional school budget if we knew this. Everyone in this room knows it. So going forward, I think the best thing this letter can do is point that out. You run the risk of your whole budget being held and discussed at town meeting, which I don't know has happened. But if they're not going to play ball during the process, they're going to play ball at town meeting, and it's going to be really uncomfortable at Lincoln Commons next year.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. One of the points, if you do want to have a look at the draft of the letter, one of the early points in the letter is that this kind of information needs to come to the town as early as possible. And since they knew this in March, which was before town meeting, that would have meant before town meeting, because that would have created, if it's a given that this is the new cost, it would have created options, as you said, for does the town want to borrow which portion rather than, having it financed another way. So completely agree with you that that is a really important point. And I think you're right too, that as Peter was describing, if these items are there in the budget that comes to town meeting, I think, again, there's some issues of, what would be broken out and what would be voted on and how does that all work? Because I think the regs aren't clear on that. But I think you're right, that it will have them think carefully about what they want to present, because they won't want to have a scenario where the whole budget gets disapproved because there's something happens that gets people that people don't think is going the right way. All right.
I mean, it calls into question the credibility, and I think they've called that in. They're going to have to live with that through this next year's process.
Ken, thank you for being patient.
Oh, you're welcome. Sean, as always, was with you. So there is actually something on the sustainability sort of thing that I'd like to circle back to at the end, because it's something I think both our committees should be thinking about. I have a sort of a loose proposal about that. But as far as this, and I listen to the appropriate part of the relevant part of the meeting. And I think if I may be allowed the term, it's almost a cultural change or a cultural way of looking at it, because Dawn talked about knowing that she was going to have some excess money from one of the projects and holding that back for other things. It seems a little bit of disingenuous kind of accounting. And then there was another comment about E&D was getting low. In my thinking and my understanding is E&D is kind of an accounting convenience. It's a place to park a little bit of money that comes and goes. The idea of they're looking at E&D and going, oh, our E&D is getting low. We've got to find a way to build that up. I found that troubling because I think, again, E&D is meant to provide a little bit of space for, when you're a little low, when you're a little high, we park the money here. They seem to be treating that and this surplus from the boiler project, which is a whole other question on that, where that came from. But they're sort of, treating it as we've got money to play with here. And I'm not saying to do anything nefarious, but I don't think that's it's a way that sort of sidesteps certain kinds of accountability, which is what we're all talking about. I think we need to, in a letter, pay attention to not just what they did, but what they said about what they were doing, because it reflects for lack of a term, the mindset on the school committee and in the schools.
Do you want to circle back to the sustainability thing? You want to do that later in the conversation?
Let's do that later.
Oh, okay. All right, good. What else?
I just a couple questions to maybe Dan and Peter, if you don't mind. Dan, in your conversations, is the capital account is that largely, are there any other dollars in that capital account for projects that are no longer going to persist? Like, has that been run dry now?
So there are dollars in the account for projects that are underway.
Yeah.
I don't think there are any other dollars in the account for projects that aren't, that have been postponed, canceled, or whatever. And I think we will get, regularly now an accounting. Dawn sent me a sheet of a spreadsheet that is not nicely labeled and all, but I think shows that there's nothing there other than projects that are underway. But there might actually be some very small balances.
Projects.
Like $6,000 left in the account. I don't know how they handle those small amounts.
Okay. Maybe on that, so in your studying of the regs, Peter, the in-house lawyer here, so this circumstance, I think, is unique in that in the proximity to the town meeting, and when some of this was all in the works. If we say this boiler breaks down in August for 25, 50 grand, how would this 45-day, so I'm certainly in favor of having all these projects on the go through the capital budgeting projects that are known. But if a project were to arise mid-year that wasn't known prior to town meeting, how would that 45-day rule come into play, or would it at all? Or how would they work through that?
Yeah, so I don't know what amount of their operating budget are sort of like contingencies when things break, but let's just assume that they have to use something beyond that. And so they're using their E&D for essentially buying a new boiler. That would be an amendment to their budget. And it would, if it's going to increase the total expenditures, then they should report that to the town within X number of days of their vote. And then the town gets 45 days in which to, either approve, reject, or sort of do nothing.
I would just add to that, that I think in recent years, the school committee has not, officially notified the town that, hey, we use E&D for a, $60,000 project. I think they understand that that's something they're gonna need to do in the future. So I think that change is gonna happen. I think the practical limitation is that the governing authority is town meeting. And so this happens midway through the year, then the only option of a 45-day change would be if the select board chose to call a special town meeting, which seems to me unlikely, except in the most extraordinary circumstances, given the complications and expense of doing that. So practically, I think projects are not likely to be rejected, which is why it becomes so important that as many as possible get into the system as part of the regular budget process.
Did we state this in the letter? I forget, like in terms of during the school year, if a project comes up, that project would then come back before, or at least they would notify the advisory or capital budget during the year of uses of E&D that were not initially.
So that's a good point. What's in there is that, the town would want information as soon as possible, but I think that would be, it strikes me as a helpful point to add to that, that official notification. If a project is going to be financed with E&D midway through the year, that needs to come to the town. Yeah, that strikes me as a good point to add.
Just one, Peter, in your studying of the regs again, so the 5% I've seen, did you find anywhere the minimum threshold that is either required or advised by any other third party with respect to
Yeah, so-
E&D balances?
So I was not looking for that. And in the CMR 603-40.06, which is talking about excess and deficiency funds, there's nothing in there that specifically talks about sort of a minimum threshold. In general, I think there is some guidance about, what sort of best practices is for that, but I'm not sure if that's in the regs. It's
So regional school committee has a policy that they approve that says they want to target E&D between 3% and 4%, but that's their policy rather than state mandate.
Yeah, I would just, I guess I'll restate my views on this. I certainly think, I think this entire discussion is somewhat moot point if E&D balance is substantially less than where it is today. I don't think this ever would have happened. If this was used for incidentals throughout the year, I believe I recall that this project, this reappropriation of $1 million was the largest in certain recent history. So it's a certainly rare event for the need to have $1 million of unseen capital items throughout the year. And again, God forbid something like that does happen, that the regional school committee has support of two financially backed towns to come to the rescue and support them and throughout the year. And so I think if we were to reduce the E&D fund to something substantially less, then these questions around spending money here and there, and ultimately these recommendations, they'll probably have some unintended consequences as well that we should probably think about in terms of what would any rational person do on the other side here and how they would go about this, some of Sean's points. So I think we should think about what those unintended consequences will likely be. But again, to solve for some of that, if we just reduced the E&D balance, I think that would solve for a lot of these issues.
I think the challenge there is that that's just, the E&D balance is the school committee's purview. If it's more than 5%, there are rules about what they have to do, but if it's less than 5%, it's their purview. We of course can, focus on their operating budget and try to make sure that there aren't places where there's, extra money that's likely to land in E&D at the end of the year. We can certainly, encourage them, and the draft of the letter says, we think you should target a lower level of E&D. But in terms of actual authority to do that, it's their authority, not ours.
They have, sorry, it's just bouncing on the capital budget. So if they have something that goes before a capital budget committee, how, not to be facetious here, but, do you say, well, get it out of your E&D? It's just, it's.
You mean if
They're
the
coming in
the
front of.
process doesn't like recommend borrowing for something, they could just go to their E&D and spend it that way? I mean, technically, they could probably wait until after town meeting and do it, and obviously that would breed a lot of ill will. But, even their capital expenditures from E&D should go
Right,
in front of the town. So, I mean, they don't have total free reign on how they use E&D in the positive. But if they don't want to use E&D, it's up to their discretion. So like, in terms of forcing them to spend down to a particular level or something. So they hit the 5%, then they have discretion not to use it.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Well, yes, they have their discretion, but our committees have our discretion. We look at their budgets and we see their E&D number is higher than we think it should be. We'd say, this is one of the things, I'm sure with the others, but this is something that we see in your proposed budget that doesn't fit with our guidelines. And while we're doing the budgeting process, it's part of the budgeting process is to negotiate with issues like that. So I think going forward, both our committees can look at E&D as, just say, well, we'll look at that as a line item and we'll think about that number in terms of looking at and improving the budget overall.
I have a process question. What's the recommended practice for the regional school committee's use of E&D is all agreed to by the various committees? And how does that get captured, right? Because I would think that you don't want to just rely on institutional memory. Probably changing bylaws seems kind of onerous. So is there another way to sort of capture what this new best practice is going forward so that everyone's aware and follows it?
I mean, I guess it would be my proposal that the letter that is ultimately sent would be almost like a memorialization of the agreement or the understanding of how the process will work going forward. So hopefully it means that the regional school district is sort of bought into the plan on how to work the process going forward. And then the letter sort of sets out, this is how we understand the process is going to go. Right. Moving forward.
Makes sense. I think the letter does a very good job of capturing points. But maybe we have to think about whether there needs to be a different section kind of outlining what the process is going forward.
Yeah,
If you want to have this letter be that.
I think you're exactly right. This letter was drafted when I had a different understanding of what the situation with the regs was. And given, I think, where we are now, that's why I did the bracketed, there's some bracketed material with the idea that's going to need to change. And I think that would need to change in exactly the way you and Peter were just describing.
Is it possible to put something in the letter that we're notified, either advisory or probably capital budget, and then maybe subsequently advisory when they're E&D, when there's a situation where they're going to hit a certain threshold with spending in E&D that we think is outside of incidentals or outside of 60,000 for this, or is there a threshold that we as a group feel like, okay, if it's over 500,000, that needs to come to our attention, or is that outside of our ability to ask for that kind of notification? How did this all come about? How did you guys find out that was approved? Because it didn't come to you for approval. We're all finding out about it after it's already been approved by regional school committee.
So I think
So there wasn't a.
Yeah, so they took this vote on May 7th. And shortly before that meeting, in like a couple days, Don Torre sent an email to Jeremy, to me, and probably to others too, that, hey, this thing is coming up. You know, you can go look at the documents to see what the stuff is. And if you track the documents, it indicated the dollar amount. So that was the first time, you know, that I think word came to light that they had this very large cost overrun. I mean, Dawn had suggested that, you know, the cost was going to be higher than 1.2, but with no numbers. And then at that time, you know, Dawn did flag that, hey, you know, it's not going to be 1.2, it's going to be 2 million. Here's how they're planning to finance it. Then, you know, that Thursday, then on May 7th, whichever day that was, the school committee voted. And I think it was the same day that Mike, or maybe shortly after that, right, that you had watched the video and then you sat around and emailed and kind of flagged for a bigger group that, hey, they just did this thing, you know, here's a link to the video.
Or could we ask for like a larger notice period before they vote on that? Like, do you know what I'm saying? There should be some
Yeah.
vetting process,
Yeah.
like that we should be given an opportunity to have the conversation. My understanding of the E&D was that it was, at least in some of the discussions of other capital projects that they had, is that they almost needed to have some of that money in the bank because they would need to buy equipment. Something might get approved, like the Pine Hill project with the air conditioners, but that they may not have the money in hand in order to buy the equipment at the time that they would need it. Do you know what I mean? It enabled them to kind of purchase capital items as needed while they were waiting for the funding after it had been approved. That's what I thought they were utilizing. That's why they needed the E&D funding, to be able to
Or at least
purchase
like
items or take
consultants.
advantage, you know what I'm saying? That was my understanding, but not that it would just be to finance some overrun that somehow
I
happened.
think they, in the meeting, they, you know, in their meeting, that they talked about how, you know, if the money that's approved at town meeting, they wouldn't actually get that funding until the next fiscal year.
Right,
So if there's a project like they want to do new floors in some section of the middle school, and they want that project to happen over the summer, they can't sign a contract until July 1 if they're waiting for the towns and what happened at town meeting. Let's say it's a $70,000 project, they can use E&D and then they can sign a contract and, you know, the day school's done, they can do it. But that would be financing the project with E&D, not financing with E&D. And then the towns would subsequently approve it and reimburse. It would be a smallish project, we'll just use E&D and then we get started right away.
Which, there's nothing wrong with that per se, it just needs to go through the process and be approved by the town. Because it's gonna be part of the budget.
it just seems like we might have vetted that, we might have asked them to do like what they did with the Pine Hill. It's such a egregious overrun of what was originally proposed. It seems to me like, how could you just not know about that until, like, the timing seems a little coincidental. It seems egregious. It reminds me a little bit of the library, like with just like these, and I think the towns are sensitive to, Sherborn in particular, I think is sensitive to things where things like that happen. I think they are, so we need to have a better way of capturing these things so that it is visible to people in the town who are paying the taxes. So not to say it wouldn't have been approved, but it's just, it would be nice if it was, there's a
really
way to capture
helpful.
that. If it's like, we can flag it, if it's gonna be over whatever that amount, I don't know what would be reasonable, but it feels to me like we could ask for something like that. They could always say no, and maybe that's outside of what we're able to do. But it seems to me we should ask for something, and there should be some kind of threshold where the alarm goes off. Okay, it's over this. Wait a second, is that incidental, or is that something that we need to look at again and see, did we get enough proposals? Is there a way to cut some of the costs on this item, this capital item? You know, 800,000 is a lot.
What would have been the cutoff, like $1.5 million overrun? Like, when do they stop? Just, you see what I'm saying, 800,000 over is a really big number.
It's big.
I mean, and it would have been really helpful, I think, if the town had known in March.
Yes.
That that's where the number came in, because then, in principle, the select board could have, you know, reopened the warrant, added an article, and, you know, town could have said, hey, we'd like to, finance, borrow our part of it rather than have it funded essentially with free cash. I don't know that that would have happened, but there could have been a conversation and some discussion before town meeting rather than, after town meeting when that was no longer a possibility.
I also think you missed the opportunity to take advantage of the knowledge that people within the community and on these committees, like Sean, other people that have a little bit of a better understanding, you didn't even take advantage of that. I don't know, maybe there are a bunch of people in regional school committee that approved that have a lot of knowledge about these types of systems. I don't have any knowledge of them, but I know there are people in the town that probably do and could have made recommendations and maybe potentially cut that cost a little bit. I have no idea. Maybe they were under a certain time constraints, but again, it just feels like we should have some kind of a way of capturing this in the future.
Seems like a sensible thing to, a very sensible thing to ask. I think in terms of authority, what they're required to do is, as Peter said, within X days, approving something with E&D that changes the budget, then they need to notify the town. But I completely agree with the basic point that, 800,000 is a lot, and it would have been helpful if people had known, not 2 days before their meeting, but, enough time to have a conversation about it.
Just to follow, to Peter, I mean, if this, a single cent that comes out of E&D would technically change the budget, right? So the threshold is.
But
anything.
Yeah, but that's notification after, not notification
Correct.
before, which is what Shelley is proposing.
Yeah, so I mean, once the notification goes to the town, in theory, the town should then hit the committees immediately, but that is post-vote, not pre-vote. So the ask, which is a sensible ask, is can you notify us, as soon as possible, but, especially until we're above the threshold to maybe particular committees. If it's like the capital budget item, then notify us, capital budget committee itself, as opposed to just the town after.
But then, can I just to follow, but here we are, capital budgets, we recommend this, or sustainability committee says something, and then it's something that goes $800,000 over on a $1.2 million project. I mean, then where's the accountability for any of this? Because I feel like we spend all this time here at night, advisory, capital budget committee, going over 5,000 here, 2,000 there, and then something like that goes through and nobody, do we have accountability to this? To have something go $800,000 over budget, I don't understand that. It gives me so much pause, is what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
I mean, I think it questions the initial project estimates and proposal and request that is coming from that source. Is I think what you're
Right, I mean,
saying.
how am I supposed to believe anything?
I mean, one of the things that, I take solace in is I look at all of the projects and whether or not they come in close to their estimates and try to figure out, again, is there some reason for this one if all the other ones are coming in, to budget and to proposal? Or is it perhaps the budget maker is just really off on all of their estimates? But in terms of capital budget committee, that's one of the things I think about is, are they coming in, without cost overruns on the majority of their projects, some of their projects, all, and that's one of the ways, at least I think about how did that.
Okay, go ahead.
So two things. So one thing we could think about perhaps is a notification threshold for what, if we consider E&D spending discretionary, to say that if you're gonna spend more than 50,000, 70,000, some number, then please let us know. The other thing, and this is what I was gonna talk about a little along with sustainability, but it's talking about what Nora's bringing about with accountability is from, what they said at the meeting, essentially, they got some feedback from people in the town who'd like this to be sustainable. Okay, well, we'll just spend some big chunk of that $800,000 was for that. And if, for example, the library is any anything to go by, going from gas to electric is going to be very expensive. It's going to be expensive every year. I mean, if you look at the library budget, the library's hybrid. The old section is heated with gas, which provides hot water for the building and auxiliary heating for the new section. The new section is heat pump electric, heat supplemented by gas. And the gas bill's about 9,000 for everything, and the electric bill for FY25 is 55,000. So it's that's an expensive choice. And I know Pine Hill, they just did a new electrical, they re-upped their electrical contract for, I guess, the next 3 years at a 70% increase. So I think that what I would ask both our committees is that when something comes in, projects where it's appropriate should have a conventional and sustainable, if I can put it that way, conventional electrical. We should, two alternates, the alternate should be there with a price difference up front and a running cost difference down the road. And the town should be able, people should decide, okay, yeah, I like the idea of electric schools, so I'll support the electric bill being, X multiples higher than a gas bill. But that process should have been transparent here. That big a change should not have been made on like, oh yeah, that's ready, we'll do that. Boom. I think that was a mistake on a number of fronts. But I also think going forward, the voters should have a chance to go, yeah, I like this version or I like that version, or at least our committees should have the chance to look at these and say, our recommendation is this, or our recommendation is that. The sustainability things they get thrown in with, without from what I can see, a cost benefit analysis of current price and running costs down the road. And I think that's already, that's kind of ouchy with the library. And I think it's going to bite us. I mean, it's going to bite the schools on this.
Yeah, Mike.
If I can, so one of my concerns with this is we don't know what the alternative will be and what the other behaviors will be with this guidance, and so the unintended consequences. And so I don't know if this is a good idea, but just a game theory on what would likely happen after this. If to Sean's point earlier, would you put any capital budget? Would you use E&D to fund any capital budget? Should you take every capital budget to the capital budgeting process, and you would use E&D only for incidentals or really true emergency projects? And so then, is that a better alternative? I don't know if that is. And to Shelley's point about, do you just have a constantly $1.5 million checking account running for $1,000, $2,000 and that's forever? I don't know. I don't know if that's a better alternative here than using it to, big chunks of capital projects. Because to Sean's, I guess I'm new to this, but if you put it through E&D and then you risk the whole budget being shot down, so you would take, presumably you'd still, all these capital projects would now go through either, capital budget committee. Right? Is that what would likely happen after this? Do you think? I don't know.
So I think this gets into the gray area where the regs don't specify how this would work. I think we have to come to some common understanding. I think you're right that it's quite possible that schools would opt for just, every capital item is an item, put to the towns, how do you want to finance? Which on the one hand, I think, helps with governance issue because it takes the authority for approving those to the town and town meeting rather than the school committee is making decisions. That seems like that strikes me as a good thing, plus, because then the town has a chance to weigh in. If every capital project goes that way, then I think where you were going is then maybe E&D doesn't need to be as high because it isn't going to be used for financing capital projects. And I think, that would require some thinking through and conversation, because again, we don't have authority over E&D. So it would require coming to, I think, a common understanding about how that's going to work. I wonder if there could be some arrangement where projects came to the town to be approved, but E&D was still a financing option. And so just as some capital projects that come to the town, say like the police cruiser, are financed with free cash, and that's a vote that the town takes to do that. If there might be a way, again, not sure this would work because it's not specified, but would there be a way that if there's a school capital project that comes as maybe a separate item, because they don't want it in the overall budget, that there could be a common agreement between the town and the regional school committee that, this will be financed with E&D. I don't know exactly how that works because of, who has the authority over which piece, but, that would seem like a way of maybe dealing with, this big E&D account, and it's not going to be used for capital anymore. But I think that would require some thinking through and conversations with the school folks.
So if I can make a couple of observations. First of all, the regional school committee is not some like faceless board or something like that that exists outside of our community. They are our neighbors. They are oftentimes our friends. They're the people we see on the street. And probably, because I think E&D has been handled a certain way for a number of years, they probably have no understanding of what I may be reading in the notes, right? So like, I think we should think about that in the way that we approach our communications with our neighbors. I also think that we are not alone here. I mean, there's another town that is a separate entity and might have separate views on this too. So to the extent that Sherborn thinks one way and votes one way, that doesn't guarantee that Dover is going to either think the same way or vote the same way. And so for the regional school district to function, it needs both towns to sort of see agreement. And I applaud Dan for reaching out to Dover Warrant. And I think that we also need to think about that in the context of there's another town that might have, sort of different viewpoint on it. But I do agree that more information and working with our neighbors in the regional school district and those members and making sure we just form a sort of best practice and legal process going forward is the appropriate way to handle this.
Mike Winters and then Sean.
Going back to the thought about it's very slow over the summer with the school committee. And so we have a little bit of time potentially on our side. I was wondering if maybe we should kind of loop in town council. Because they probably will have something to add. Maybe other options, maybe other ideas, who knows? They may even know what they might have dealt with something similar on another regional school issue. And then piggybacking on that thought, maybe we can do some investigative work. Jeremy or others might be able to reach out to other regional schools, just find out how is their so we're not reinventing the wheel.
Yeah, we were trying to set up, and Peter and I were trying to set up a meeting with town council earlier this week, exactly with that thought in mind. That didn't happen, but that seems, yeah, I think we want to be very careful with the letter, that we don't send off a letter and then have people come back and say, well, that's wrong and that's wrong and that's wrong. So yeah, that will take it. Sean.
Sorry, I need to keep harping on this, but a few of your predecessors, Dan, I think would be jumping up and down at a comment you just made. And I want to remind you that you guys, the people at those tables that I'm looking at, print what I think is the most important document every year, which is the advisory report. You absolutely get to weigh in on the level of E&D. The school committee might vote on it, but the writing that you guys do in the advisory report has as much to say, and the vote at town meeting is what ultimately sets the E&D limit. So whether or not you guys really hit on it last year, I think you're probably gonna next year. And that the purpose of the budget process is to determine what that level should be and what the funding should be. That's your whole purpose.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Couple of comments. I'm reading from the advisory report from last year. Advisory members raised questions about whether regional schools could target a lower level of excess and deficiency known as E&D, blah, blah, blah. So we hit on that in last year, in this year's advisory report. I'm sure we'll hit on it again next year. I push back on one point though, which is we cannot set the level of E&D for the schools. We can set their overall budget and that will have implications for E&D. But, E&D is, the end of the year free cash, what was budgeted, how much did they spend, which accounts did they spend over, did they spend under, and then, then there's a recalculation of E&D. So we can set the overall budget. We can certainly, as you, noted, make comments in the report about what we think they're doing with E&D, but we can't actually say E&D should be 3%. We just can't. It would be nice if we could, but that's their authority, not our authority. We can use the rhetoric and make the case, but can't actually tell them how to do it.
I completely agree, but you can certainly set the tone in some meetings, regardless of what the people on the other side of the Charles River might think.
Yeah.
You have the authority. You can absolutely set the tone of the meetings leading up to the budget.
I totally agree with that. And we did a version of that this year. And I think you're right that we will do more of that next year. So I hope my predecessors wouldn't be too unhappy with, our hitting on E&D in the advisory report this spring.
No, it's more to your comment that you can't influence it.
Yeah. So maybe I misspoke. I think we can influence, but it's their authority. It's not our authority.
Agreed.
Yeah. Okay. All right. What else?
Can I make just a little comment? It may be the policy of the regional school committee that their E&D is 2 to 3%. I believe it's
3 to 4 is
3 to 4 is their target, but nobody is appropriating to E&D. It's the leftovers from the operating budget, and it is this somewhat unpredictable from year to year, and they may well look upon themselves as, well, congratulations, we were thrifty and we got to add an extra $20,000 to E&D this year.
I think they do.
Yeah.
I think they do think about it that way.
Yeah, and so they probably look upon that as a positive thing, that they're being financially responsible by accumulating this. It's kind of like a Christmas club account. And I think it does require a certain amount of diplomacy about how to address the problem.
You don't want to incentivize them to spend every nickel that they get in their budget. It'd be better for them to be conservative and accrue E&D essentially.
And you also don't want to encourage them to keep padding the operating budget so that they will have predictable overage that they can then move over to E&D.
Right. Yeah.
Dan, did you say the E&D is held in a separate account? Like E&D funds or was that the capital?
It's
items?
capital.
Capital items, okay.
It's a separate.
Okay.
Regional school committees are like municipalities. They're
Okay.
they're their own creature. And in our town operating budget, when we have leftover money at the end of the year, it goes into general revenue. And that's the source of free cash amongst other things. But in a regional school, they're an entity unto themselves, and so they can retain that. So if you're looking for other schools and how they handle it, you'll have to look for other regional schools and how they handle it.
To your point, Corey, in that meeting that they spoke about other regional schools, spending everything they had so they didn't have to give anything back to the town. So the regional school committee expressed pride in their not doing that, and they're being responsible. Saying, okay, we do we do have this extra money, we don't spend everything, we end up with zero. If we don't spend money willy-nilly, just end up with zero because we park it in E&D and they see that as a responsible thing to do. And I think that is a good thing. That's what E&D is for. I think so I do applaud them for doing that. I think though, from the way they talk about, well, E&D is getting low, we need to build it back up. They also seem to have a desired amount in E&D. And that's where there's, how you make that happen, or even setting that kind of goal, I find a little trouble. It's sort of like, it's because it's not like an account you pay into. It's kind of like, well, it's more like the change jar on your dresser. It's like, I got some spare change, I'll throw it in there. Oh, what I got, I got $35. I'm gonna go get, an extra latte.
So if I make one observation, and Deb and Pam, you can hopefully answer my question. But the town of Sherborn has a specific goal with respect to how much free cash as a percentage of the budget it has, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's very similar to the school district. We have a policy, and our policy is to hopefully our goal is to maintain 5% in our free cash. And so when we do the budget, if you remember going to an advisory meeting and I have this little sheet that I says, this is how much we start with free cash. And we're going to use this much for capital projects, this much to put in capital stabilization, this much to put in this, and come up with a new balance. And that new balance, we hope to be 5% of the next operating budget. And I'm assuming that the regional school district does the same, that when they have free cash, they allocate it so that they end up with a balance of 3 to 4%. And it's like your savings account. You get it low, but you want to build it up because you don't know what the future is going to hold. And that's the policy, is to keep 3 to 4% in their E&D in their budget. So that's how they work.
So it's not different than how the town of Sherborn works as well.
No, it appears to be the same. I don't know for a fact, but just by the way you're discussing it, it seems like it's very similar to how the town operates.
And that's based upon guidance about how to fiscally be prudent in organizing and running the town. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a policy that has been created.
The free cash for the town creates flexibility in the event of unexpected developments. E&D, same for the school district. Get to you just a second, Mike. I was just going to pick up on Ken and Corey's comments that Dawn did say to me when I met with her that, they think of, money going into free cash, meaning that there's a budget surplus, as a good thing because they manage the budget carefully and didn't spend every dollar they could have spent. Because she even said to me, it'd be easy for us to do that, but that doesn't seem like the fiscally prudent thing to do. And so then they do, when with surplus that rolls into E&D, and as noted, their policy, what their view is, they need 3 to 4% to feel comfortable in terms of in terms of unexpected things that might come. Our letter suggests the lower number would be sufficient. Mike has made that argument as well, particularly since they have the backstop of the towns, and that they could perhaps target a lower level. And the key point in my mind about why that would be a valuable thing is if they were to target a lower level and decide they don't need as big a cushion, well then, that means at least for that year, the budget would be lower because they'd be thinking about a lower budget surplus, and that would be less of an ask of taxpayers. So, by having a big surplus, that big surplus is coming about by taxing the residents of Sherborn and Dover. And, were they to target a lower level, that would reduce the assessments to the town. I completely agree with what Gary said about diplomacy being required. And, again, given that we have authority over some things, but not other things, that what is going to probably be most productive is, come to some understanding with them about how we're going to do this, because it's not something that I think we're going to be able to just dictate with, here's how it's going to be. The state sets up regional school districts as independent governmental entities, very much like it's as if it's its own town.
Mhm.
So anyways, my soapbox pitch on that. Right.
I just, one fun, I would observe, the fact that the town operates at a similar free cash level, 3 to 4% as the regional school. I see, those two things shouldn't be the same. One of them is either too high or too low, in my opinion. I'd make two observations. One is, I don't believe the town, 85% of the town's operating budget is fixed labor and salaries. I believe it's lower than that. So there's more variable cost structure that Deb has to deal with than the school committee does. And two, there's no financial backer behind the town. So if Deb runs out of cash, that's a problem. The school's not. So again, the fact that both the school committee and the town are operating at a 3 to 4% excess fund, one of those two numbers is wrong, in my opinion. Someone's too high and someone's too low.
Deb, what was the number for the town that you had cited?
5%. 5% of the operating budget is what we tried to maintain in free cash.
There's a small difference, but it could be.
Yeah.
Could be bigger.
Around.
Yeah,
I think we have two issues that we're talking about. One of them is the problem of having an extraordinary cost overrun on a project that managed to evade any vetting by our various committees and any vote by annual town meeting. And then the other issue is the general topic of the E&D. And I think we need to decide perhaps which is the more important to us at the moment and needs maybe a little firmer diplomacy and which is more of a long-term consideration. I think the wild cost overrun that no one had a chance to vet is probably the more pressing issue.
I concur.
Yeah, so.
I think I actually land on the other side. So on the cost overrun, it would be really useful to see the accounting of the 800,000, how much was in each of those different items. How much is just the project was delayed 2 years and given the construction market for contractors and what bids are like, that's going to lead to some significant escalation. Be interested to know how much was that and how much was these other things related to the change in the scope of the project. And I don't know what the number is. When I first heard there was going to be a cost overrun, I wasn't surprised by that, given the dynamics of the project. It was, yeah, of course it's going to be a cost overrun. That it was 800,000 came as a big surprise to me.
72%?
Yeah, that came as a huge surprise to me, that it was 800,000.
And I think the big, even the part of it that I find more disturbing even than the cost overrun is the way it evaded
Yes,
any kind of
yes,
vetting.
yes. And so I think that this was known in March, but we didn't learn about it until May is a big problem. And, needs, I think, some pretty strong language indicating that's really the problem for the town. I actually think that the E&D piece, the reason that I'm focused on the E&D piece is that going forward, I think that's the piece where we can get the most traction in adjusting processes and procedures so that when they want to finance projects with E&D, the town has more say-so, and from a governance perspective, the town can get more involved in vetting and thinking through capital projects in the future. To me, the cost overrun is very unfortunate, huge amount of money, raises a lot of questions, but there isn't really anything we can do about it.
Why not?
It's more of a symptom of the underlying.
And so I'm more interested in trying to think about the process going forward. Well, I mean, what would the options be
That's my
for
question.
fixing it? I mean, the school committee has the authority to do what they did. It's, you know, it's unfortunate, but they have the authority to do what they did. And so there was a cost overrun. It needed to be, either the project, either it needed to be, we're not doing it, or we're gonna do 4 units rather than 7 and just do half the project, or it needed to be financed somehow. And, you know, they made a decision how to finance it. It's very unfortunate that they didn't come to the town and get the towns involved in thinking through the, you know, what to do. But there isn't any undoing that the project is gonna cost $2 million.
They actually made 2 decisions, if I may. I mean, they made the decision to sort of sidestep. Well, the first decision they made was to change the scope of the project in a way that it was really increase the cost. And I don't know, how we haven't been able to parse out the difference, but it was not, the decision to go from gas to electric was not a negligible part of that process. So that was one decision they made, and then they kind of just took that and, oh, we're just gonna run with that. And because if they had not made that decision, or if that decision had gone through some vetting, then there would have been, we wouldn't be having this level of a discussion. If it had been like, oh, here's the original project as originally planned, and it's gone up 35% or 50%, or whatever, you know, whatever it did over, because it's a couple of years later, we're changing the scope of this and that. But it's like, you know, we made a significant difference in the planning of it. And it's a 72, if I do the math right, it's 72% increase. That's a big chunk. And we know things have gone up. Some big chunk of that has been this decision to change it from gas.
I think the issue is that decision is not going to be unwound. There's nothing we can do here tonight, nor in the future, to unwind that decision. But I guess in my view, we can improve the processes going forward so that it doesn't happen like that again. Right?
Yeah.
And so I think that is where I would say our energy and sort of our voice would hopefully be channeled towards fixing sort of the underlying process problems. So something like that doesn't happen again. I mean, we can bang on the table and say, we're not happy, we're not happy, we're not happy about what you did. But if that's where the focus is, then I think you might lose the sort of willingness to have improve the process.
I couldn't agree with you more. However, like, look at the library project that Shelley brought up. No, it's almost like we have the same problem that just happened again. So it is happening again. So I look at it kind of from that point of view. I know it's a separate entity, so I'm not really trying to pick on the school piece, but more of like, how does this happen? And I remember bringing it up in a meeting, and it's a CBC meeting, you know, probably April or May, whatever. And I was saying, how do we have this not happen again? And it's just disappointing.
Yeah.
Again, it just happens to be the school, but whatever it is, we're sitting here, and I'm sorry to repeat myself, but I don't understand how it can keep happening. But that's all. I just find it frustrating.
Right, that any project goes.
Right, it's any project.
It's immensely frustrating.
I actually think, maybe I didn't make myself clear, because I actually agree with you. That when I said it was 2 issues, I meant that there was this problem that we had about this large expenditure that was not vetted. And then we have the problem about E&D and how is E&D managed. And I agree with you that this problem is done, it's over, and we have to look at not having another one of these happen in the future. But I think with E&D, we can either, seems to me there's kind of 2 mechanisms to not have it happen again. One is to make sure that any capital project goes through the vetting process regardless of how it's funded. And that includes E&D money. That's one thing to worry about. And the other thing is we're discussing putting some limit on what's a floor and a ceiling. Well, we know the ceiling's 5% on E&D. The state took care of that. But if we have a floor under E&D, I'm not so sure that that's too much in our purview, because I think that's fraught with encouraging them to spend every penny or padding the budget. There's some other issues. But certainly the issue of making sure that every capital thing is vetted regardless of how it's funded. That's right up our wheelhouse.
So when I said that, I was pushing back and
Yeah.
wanted to, think that the E&D piece is more important, what I meant by that was not the level of E&D, but rather the point you just made of when the schools choose to finance a project with E&D, currently they just do that.
Yeah.
And that really that should be part of the budget process. And that's the thing to me that is especially important. I think, making the point about, suggesting that they target a lower level of E&D, I think it's fine for us to do that. I think it will fall on deaf ears. I don't think that will affect anything with how they operate things. And other than shining a spotlight on it, as Sean highlighted, there really isn't anything that we can do about that. That's really their thing to figure out. And so when I said I thought the E&D piece was more important, it's the piece about if a capital project financed with E&D, that go through the process. And that's the piece that to me is especially, salient and where there's likely to be the biggest benefit going forward in terms of the town having more say-so in capital projects that the schools are undertaking.
I just add on that. I agree. I think we have to put the policies or procedures in place to allow for transparency and oversight into this process. But I think we also have to work on the assumption that the people in these roles are going to act in good faith too. And so, because if we don't believe that, then we have nothing. And so I think we put the procedures in place so we can have a transparent process and be part of the process, but we also have to assume that they're going to act responsibly and not overspend budgets and not do all these other things, or else then we're at square one.
And for my part, I think they are acting in good faith. I think they have a set of incentives of wanting to, as many organizations, they want to have as much control as they can, and they want to have as much financial flexibility as they can. And so they're sort of thinking about looking after that as their organization. I think that runs a bit counter to interests of Sherborn and perhaps Dover too. I'll see what Dover thinks. And so then there's a matter of sort of sorting out where that boundary is and how that goes. But for my part, I don't think there's been. Let me say, I really think people are acting in good faith. I wish we had known about this a lot sooner, but I would still say I think people there are acting in good faith. I don't think there's anything nefarious that's been happening.
No, I meant even Sean, all the budget makers have to. We have to
Yeah,
assume everyone
absolutely.
in the town who
Absolutely.
has responsibility actually to pay. So
So just one
Go ahead.
final thing,
Go ahead.
the $300,000 thereabouts, that was
Boiler.
budgeted, boiler, that then came off, that never went to capital budget, right? That never was on.
The
our
boiler
plan?
project in the first place.
Mhm.
I believe it was mentioned, and I'm not sure I was around for this, but I thought it was one of those projects that was initially floated to capital budget, but because it went to E&D, that means capital budget didn't actually vote on it. But I'm not sure about
I
that.
think actually it was a regular capital item. It was voted on, the money was appropriated, but it was never spent because they never went forward with the project.
That is how Don described it in their meeting.
It was,
Yeah.
they voted to finance it with it wasn't a town, I don't think it was a town appropriation.
Oh, okay.
Which is why they were able to
Shelved
shuffle
it in
it
a separate
around.
row.
Right.
I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
so is that kind of a problem, that's a big capital item? and it
So
didn't
that
get
would
vetted?
be something that, again, if we implement what I think is the appropriate procedures, that would not happen again, where we would not vote and then it wouldn't go to. it
Right, I
would
just
then
wanted
go the
to,
town.
since we
Yeah.
didn't talk about it, I did want to.
Right.
Dawn also readily agreed when I talked with her that every capital project the school does would be on the capital plan and would stay on the capital plan, whatever the financing, rather than oh, the schools decided to finance this with E&D, so they're gonna pull it off the capital plan. And then, the boiler thing sort of disappeared and we didn't see it. And it should have been on the capital plan, financed with E&D, delayed. And it would have been there and we could have all, could have seen as the capital plan that, here's a project that was financed with E&D, but hasn't been completed, rather than just disappear from the capital plan. So I think that's gonna help, that they're, that if they put every project on the capital plan, that it remains on the capital plan. So it's, will
Okay.
make it easier for us to see things like, oh yeah, there's a spoiler project. Wait, where's the money for that sitting? And, whatever.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, I think part of the distaste about E&D, and maybe it's not, is there seems to be sort of a lack of oversight over it and how it's being used. So I would hope that with these processes and oversight and greater transparency, then there'll be a little bit more comfort perhaps with E&D. Because it's like, well, we know where it's going, it has to be voted on by the town.
Thank you.
Other comments?
So
All right.
general do outs for capital budget committee, I do, and I'll try to take the lead on this, but is to have a conversation with town council, either in connection with the advisory or Jeremy or somebody else, but at least try to make sure that conversation happens so that the town has town council sort of viewpoint on what I believe is the appropriate regulatory procedures here. And then unless some other member of the capital budget committee wants to put a hand in helping out draft any letter. So, I mean, my view on this is it would be great if the letter was sort of a memorialization of an understanding of like, this is the way it's going to happen going forward. And here are some of the concerns why we think that this process is important. So that might take a little bit longer to make sure but I don't know how the capital budget committee of this meeting feels about in that respect of what, if that should be sort of the goal of the letter.
I think it would be similar to the draft that Dan already has, right?
We need some of the material Peter just talked about, specking out that here's our understanding of, how projects next with E&D are meant to be approved. Probably
Right.
a couple paragraphs.
And it would be great if it was, in fact, signed up, not maybe literally signed off on, but potentially shown to the school and say, hey, this is our understanding.
Yeah.
Is this your understanding? This is the memorialization of our common understanding. And if that could be even involved over, great.
So my takeaways, just adding on to what Peter said, I completely agree with everything that Peter said. I think a lot of the things that we talked about are more or less one way or another in the draft. Maybe the language could be better. One thing in particular that seems really important to emphasize, which may come through in the material that Peter was just talking about, is the notion of projects financed with E&D are part of the budget, and need to one way or another be approved by the town and make sure that that comes through clearly. And then I think there was the point Shelley made about if outside of the regular budget cycle, that the requirement, if they're going to finance a project with E&D, is that they have to notify the towns within X days. That not that they're required to, but it sure would be nice. Those aren't the words that would be in the letter, but it sure would be nice if, in terms of transparency, that was communicated with the towns in an early date, rather than, hey, tonight they're going to vote on it when it's sort of too late for anybody to really react. I think those were, I'm just flipping through my notes here. I think those were my, those I think were my big takeaways of things that we need to change. It's obviously way premature to focus on a specific letter, but I mean, my hope would be that when we converge on a draft, that advisory would affirmatively decide to send the draft. Capital budget would, and if Dover wanted to be the same, that'd be great. Though I don't find out next week what they want to do. Anything else that seemed like key stuff in terms of drafting a letter that should be here? And I think I'd be inclined to continue with the language, because we have to think about this, but, targeting a lower level of E&D, but without putting a specific number. Since I'm not sure there's consensus on that, and there are all these complicated issues around, how they game theory bit on how they do this. All right, anything else anybody wanted to get into on this? Okay, thank you, everybody. So I was hoping advisory could stick around to approve minutes from a prior meeting. So if you guys want to bail, I mean adjourn.
I'm not sure if there's any other business for capital budget committee. So does anyone have a motion?
I move to adjourn the capital budget committee. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, 3 unanimous. So it's 9:10.
I'll just say thanks to everybody online and here for what I think was a really good conversation. Hard issues, messy, frustrating, but good conversation. And I think if in the fullness of time we get a draft that does the things that we talked about, I think we can make some progress on how things go in the future. All right, so advisory. I circulated minutes from the.
May I speak?
Of course.
I just want to echo the thanks to everybody for a productive meeting. And thank you for everybody hanging out pretty late on Wednesday night. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Thanks, Peter. All right, so I circulated minutes from the April 23rd meeting. This was the very brief meeting that we had right before town meeting. I don't know if it was really necessary to do minutes, but trying to just dot i's and cross t's, wrote up minutes. Any comments, corrections?
Motion to approve minutes?
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Wasim is aye. Okay, great. Thank you.
Shortest minutes ever.
Yeah, yeah.
We met.
Yeah, pretty much. And I just, for the record, I took minutes, so I know everybody slogs through doing that. And hey, I contribute to taking minutes too.
Strategically chosen meeting.
Yes, exactly. Unless anybody has anything else, motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Wait. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to confirm that there's gonna be a majority for Thursday night, July the 11th, to make any year-end transfers.
Thank you, Deb. That was our one other item. So we didn't quite vote because Wasim didn't get a chance to vote. One of our tasks is to approve year-end transfer, which is a joint select board advisory task. Possibly there'd be reserve fund requests, which is an advisory task. But what Deb is focused on is the select board is tentatively planning on July 11th to approve year-end transfers. And we could have a joint meeting with them. And there'll be information that comes out about that ahead of time that will get circulated with what transfers and what the explanations are and so on. But it would be probably most efficient to just have a joint meeting with them on the 11th. I think, Deb, how confident are you now that that'll be the date as compared to it slipping to later?
Yeah. Well, it all depends on how everything comes together at the last minute when the departments turn in their invoices and everything else like that. But the goal really is July the 11th. By state law, it has to be done by the 15th. So if it doesn't happen by the 11th, it would be the 15th. But I think a 95% chance it can happen on the 11th.
Okay. Are people checking calendars available on the 11th?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
The 15th, if we ended up in that bad scenario.
No from me.
What time would that be? 7?
Yeah. 7-ish. So as Deb said, I think July 11th is the
That's the probable date.
I can do the 11th to the 15th.
Okay, great. So may not know until pretty close to then, but then we'll get there. Thank you, Deb. I'm
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, it's just important to make sure that you have a majority there. That's it.
Yeah.
So,
It was on my agenda, on my list, and I just got a little overtaken by
Okay.
the discussion and lost track of it. All right, so let's try again. Motion to adjourn,
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
all in favor?
Okay.
Wasim, aye, great, okay, excellent, thank you. What time is it? 9:15. Okay. All right, thanks, everybody.
all right, good night. Go Celtics.
Yeah,
Recording off.
we'll be in just a second.